Hi, this is Laura Holyoke, and I have a PowerPoint for you going over the logic model. I'm sure that most of this, once you've done your reading, that you already get, but I want to take some time and explain it a little bit more. So what is a logic model? It's a picture, and we like pictures because for most people, we don't just work well with words. So a picture of a program that is supposed to work, and it's how that program is supposed to work. It makes explicit and visual our activities that are in the program and that are supposed to bring about the change that we want to see. It also states explicitly the results we expect to see. So it displays how change unfolds. It is somewhat of a roadmap or a conceptual map. It is also known as a program theory, as you read, and can also be known as some sort of theory of change. So the idea in a logic model, and it's really fuzzy, the picture I have for you at the bottom, or the visual, but the idea is if we do this, if we offer these activities or services and outputs, then this should happen. And the this should happen are the short-term, interim, and long-term outcomes. So we all started with a need statement, and it's generally used in seeking funding for programs. So if there is a need to help teenagers stop smoking, that the need would be because high cancer rates or whatever it is, but you track it back to something that is needed. I linked mine to something that I felt like I needed, and so another piece of the pie that many of you have mentioned is feeling the need to reduce your stress. So what is that unmet need? And then the problem statement is, well, why is that need? Why does that need to be met? That's not a very good way to say it. Anyhow, so the specific problem you want to address should be laid out for your program plan. And then it's the thinking through change. So once you've identified your need, then you also name or identify your desired results. I just combined those three words, desired results. At the lower right-hand corner, you can see if the need is that you have a headache, then the desired results are that you want to feel better ultimately. So the inputs, or activity, if you will, would be to get pills. The outputs, it's not outcome, remember, this is the outputs, is to take this pills, or take 3 pills, take 2 pills. And then the outcome is to feel better. So essentially, a logic model helps you develop the strategy for achieving the goals. Elements of a logic model, and these should look pretty familiar to you since you just submitted your program planning assignment. So that the outcome or goal is ultimately should be your long-term goal or program impact. Resources, inputs, what needs to be invested in terms of time, money, personnel, energy. Activities, what does the program produce? What is it that we do in the program? Outputs are events, actions, steps, or activities. So outputs, again, are directly related to activities. It says how long we do something, how often we do something, and it usually can be easily measured. And then outcomes are what we expect to change for the target market, community, or organization. For us, the outcomes that are what we expect in terms of change for us. So we're looking at this diagram and text that illustrates the logical or causal, if you will, relationships among program elements and the problem to be solved. So we say, and this is how you read it from left to right, if we use these resources for these activities, so if the activity is it's lecture about reducing stress, to produce these outputs, so the lecture may, or I may listen to a YouTube video 20 minutes every day so that these customers can change their way so that I can begin a mindfulness practice, which leads to, so the first one may be that I understand mindfulness a little bit better, which leads to me establishing a mindfulness practice, and ultimately that I lower my stress level and become more mindful. Here's another example of a logic model and the steps. So inputs, I think most people get inputs dialed in pretty well. Most people struggle among the activities, outputs, and outcomes. So if the activity is to deliver a one-session lecture, the output would be either the length of that lecture or how often that lecture is given, or the number of youth in the lectures. So these are what we plan to do in the program. What we expect are the outcomes. So we expect the increased knowledge, and then the intermediate outcome, we are hoping that the youth quit smoking, and a long-term outcome that ultimately then there's less illness, longer life expectancy, lowered health costs. So I'll repeat this a lot. Again, a logic model across the top, it doesn't have its labels in it, but on the left-hand side is the planned work. So what's put in by the program. The intended results are all the outcomes, not the outputs, the outcomes. So once the activities take place and certain frequency or number, the planned work, then we expect to see and hope to see certain kinds of results. I want to just take a minute to talk about goals and objectives as well. A goal is a statement that describes how things will be different if the program is successful. Goals are long-term. Goals are also thought about in program planning as impact statements. So if the goal is to improve mental health and well-being, objectives are specific, measurable, time-based benchmarks that will indicate that you are working towards your goal. So if the overall goal is improve mental health and well-being, one objective is to reduce stress. So just by reducing stress, it doesn't improve the overall. So we are going to add a couple more things. So another objective is to boost working memory or focus. Third one may be to decrease emotional reactivity. So for each one of the objectives, and for each one of your objectives, there should be a linking output. There should be an activity that gets you there, along with output, along with expected results. So it's another way of looking at this. Your goals and objectives should link your actions to the outcomes and ultimately measure impact. When you state your actions, that they should be very clear. Those are activities. Your outcomes should be specific, measurable, and timely, which is why they are divided into short-term, interim, and long-term outputs. So this is a template that I provided for you in the class, and you may use this template. It's built out of Word, or you can also find, a lot of people find different templates that work for them that are in a logic model. I've asked and stated for your program assignment that it needs to at least include the inputs, activities, outputs, short, medium, and long-term outcomes. You can also see the double lines in here. So the idea is that the activities and outputs get paired together, and then the outcomes are also should fall into place with one another. Here's an example. It's not an example, it's just the idea of what goes into each one of these columns. Again, the outputs relate directly to the activities, and then the short-term outcomes are what we expect immediately when somebody goes through an activity. The medium-term outcomes are more about the skills and behaviors and capabilities, that it's the idea that we want these changes to happen, and the idea that we're using these skills more than just learning them. And then the long-term outcomes, once again, are usually what the program hopes to achieve over time, that impact. Logic model can also be thought of as if-then statements. So if we put in these resources, then we can produce these activities. If we produce these activities, then we're going to deliver these outcomes. If we deliver these outputs, then we expect that we'll have these outcomes. If these outcomes happen, then we expect that these will be the long-term impacts of the program. So again, on the left-hand side, your planned work. On the right-hand side, the intended results. So logic models, even though they're often thought of as if-then statements, there's also a way to look at logic models in reverse. So reverse logic models starts from the far right-hand side and asks questions of, but how? So if we want to get an impact or a goal statement, we need to then ask ourselves, but how are we going to get there? So reverse logic models start from the right. You can create them in reverse order, and some people start on both ends. But the idea is once you've set your goal statement, that is, you can start there from your far right. This is the impact. How am I going to get there? What do I need to do to get there? What do I need to start practicing? What do I need to learn? What activities do I need to do? So here's one way of looking at it, although I think it probably is better looked at from right to left. But if the long-term desired outcome is that the healthy days will increase, well, how do we get to that long-term outcome? Well, we have our employees increase their physical activity. Okay, great. How do we get them to increase their physical activity? Well, we make environmental changes that are implemented and promoted, and some of these environmental changes, so how do we get there? Then we need to improve stairwells. We need to add walking trails. Well, how do we do that? Well, how do we know that that's what needs to be done? So this is based on research. Then we do conduct research to learn that. This looks really busy, but I also want you to look at it in terms of, you can read it from left to right and from right to left. So how the activities, they call them indicators here. So if we identify and coordinate venues for presenting seminars, then our output would be the number of seminars offered annually and their geographic location, distribution it says, and then outcomes would be the appropriate number of courses that are offered. So I guess this does feed into this. And then short term, if we do these things, then we expect that to improve education among state realtors, intermediate and long term. So I encourage you to take a couple minutes and read through this. And if the long term, and start at the long term, and if this is this, then how are we going to get there? I believe this is my last slide. So just one logic model tip, that models do not need to be drawn to scale. And you can put in a lot of details in your program plan and your logic model here. But I think it's best to keep them clear and to the point, and not super short, but shorter. So the guy says next. Now, if you'll follow me into the next room, we'll take a look at some of the long-term outcomes. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.